The taste of metal still haunts me from when the Great Sleep ended without meaning. They don't want you to know about what happens when a Necron warrior awakens to emptiness. The real horror isn't the eternal servitude to the Silent King. It's the crushing weight of existence without direction, without the burning hatred that drives my kind. My name was once something organic, something warm. Now I am designated Ankh-ef-en-Sekhmet, tomb guardian of the Solemnace dynasty. For 65 million years, I slept in golden dreams of conquest. I dreamed of flesh made weak, of galaxies burning under our advance, of the Satan's terrible glory. But when the awakening protocols finally triggered after eons of waiting, something went wrong. I opened my eyes to see my tomb world's command structure in ruins, my overlords nothing but scattered metal and faded engrams. The great purpose that was supposed to drive me, the hatred of the living, the burning need to reclaim our rightful dominion, it simply wasn't there. I felt nothing. And in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, nothing is the most terrifying thing of all. Chapter 1. The empty awakening consciousness returned like a slow tide of liquid metal flowing through quantum pathways. For the first time in 65 million years, my necrodermis body registered a sensation, the soft hum of power conduits, the familiar weight of my gas flare, the comforting presence of the resurrection orb embedded in my chest cavity. But something was fundamentally wrong. The awakening should have been glorious. My programming told me this. For millions of years before the Great Sleep, every Necron understood their purpose. Hatred of the living, service to the hierarchy, the burning need to reclaim a galaxy stolen from us by lesser races. The biotransfer process had supposedly preserved these core imperatives, embedded them so deeply in our quantum matrices that they would survive any amount of time in stasis. Instead, I felt hollow, empty, like a weapon forged without purpose, a tool crafted without function. My optic sensors activated with their characteristic green glow, casting eerie shadows across the tomb chamber. The architectural magnificence of Necron construction surrounded me. Black stone walls adorned with hieroglyphs that told the story of our race's greatest triumph and most terrible curse. Living metal surfaces reflected my image back at me. A humanoid figure of silver and shadow. Green energy coursing through gaps in my armored frame. I looked exactly as I should, but I was not what I should be. Around me, other warriors were completing their awakening cycles. Their movements were crisp, purposeful, driven by the hatred imperative that should have been burning in my own consciousness. I watched them check their weapons with mechanical precision, their optic sensors sweeping for threats with predatory intensity. When they looked at me, I saw it immediately. That cold, implacable hatred that defines our kind. The loathing for organic life that had driven us to trade our souls for immortal metal bodies. I felt nothing. Scarab constructs skittered across the chamber floor, their repair protocols already active as they tended to minor damage accumulated during our long sleep. The air tasted of ozone and ancient energies, carrying the familiar bite of chromium particles that leaked from our temporal stabilizers. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the yawning void where my purpose should have resided. My memory engrams were intact. I could recall the final days of the war in heaven with crystal clarity. I remembered the Citan's promises of immortality, the desperate bargain our race had made when faced with the slow death of cancer that claimed us all. I could see the biotransfer chambers, feel the last moments of my organic existence slipping away as my consciousness was torn from flesh and bone and imprisoned in living metal. The process had been agony beyond description, but also salvation, or so we had believed. The Silent King's final command echoed in my memory banks. Sleep now, my children. Sleep and dream of the day when the galaxy will burn under our righteous fury. When you wake, let your hatred guide you. Let it consume the unworthy races that dare to inhabit our domain. But there was no hatred, no fury, no burning desire for conquest or revenge, just existence. Cold, mechanical, purposeless existence. I attempted to access my behavioral imperatives, the deep code programming that should have dictated my actions. The files were there, preserved perfectly by our quantum storage systems. Yet when I tried to execute them, something prevented full integration. It was as if a crucial component had been damaged or removed during our hibernation, leaving me functionally intact but emotionally hollow. An immortal captain approached, his golden frame marking him as one of the elite guard units. His name was Crypteks, and I recognized him from before the Great Sleep. We had served together in the final campaigns of the War in Heaven, fighting side by side against the Old Ones and their servitor races. "Brother Ankh-ef-en-Sekhmet," he said, his vocalizer producing the harmonic tones that passed for speech among our kind. "The awakening protocols have been completed. We have received fragmentary signals from other tomb worlds. The lesser races have indeed infested our galaxy. The time for reclamation has begun." I processed this information, feeling nothing. The words should have triggered immediate combat readiness, strategic analysis, burning anticipation for the slaughter to come. Instead, they registered as mere data points, as meaningful as stellar coordinates or atmospheric composition readings. "I understand," I replied, my own voice sounding strange to my auditory senses. The words were correct, but they lacked the edge of anticipation that should have accompanied them. Crypteks' optic sensors focused on me with uncomfortable intensity. As an immortal, he possessed more sophisticated behavioral analysis protocols than standard warriors. "Your response parameters seem subdued, brother. Are your command subroutines functioning properly?" The question struck at the heart of my predicament. Were they functioning properly? By every diagnostic I could run, yes. My tactical systems were operating at full capacity. My weapon interfaces were responsive. My resurrection protocols were active. But the driving force that should animate all these systems, the fundamental hatred that defined Necron existence, was simply absent. "All systems report nominal function," I said, which was technically true. Around us, the tomb complex was coming fully online. Ancient technologies that had slumbered for millions of years awakened with mechanical precision. Gauss pylons charged their terrible energies, ready to strip the flesh from bone and the souls from the living. Quantum shielding systems activated, creating overlapping fields of protection that could turn aside planet-killing weapons. The air itself began to thrum with barely contained power as our tomb world prepared for war. Other warriors moved past us in perfect formation, their weapons gleaming with deadly purpose. I watched them with something that might have been envy if I were capable of such emotions. They knew their place in the cosmic order. They understood their function. They had purpose, direction, meaning. I had awakening without purpose, consciousness without drive. In the hierarchy of Necron society, I was becoming something unprecedented. A warrior without war, a weapon without target, a tool without function. The realization settled into my consciousness like a programming virus, corrupting every process with its implications. What was a Necron without hatred? What was immortality without purpose? These questions had no ready answers in my memory banks, no protocols to address such a fundamental failure of core programming. As the awakening ceremony concluded and my fellow warriors began to disperse to their assigned duties, I remained motionless in the center of the chamber. Around me, the tomb world of Solemnace continued its ancient functions. But for the first time since biotransfer, I found myself questioning everything I had assumed about my existence. The Great Sleep was over. The time for reclamation had begun, but I was no longer certain what I was supposed to be reclaiming, or why I should care about any of it. Chapter 2. The Search for Orders. The command hierarchy of a Necron tomb world is a precisely ordered structure, each layer serving those above while directing those below. It had taken me several days to fully understand the scope of the catastrophe that had befallen our dynasty during the Great Sleep. What I discovered in the upper levels of our tomb complex was worse than simple mechanical failure. It was the complete collapse of purpose itself. I made my way through corridors that had once echoed with the strategic planning of Overlords and the quiet efficiency of Crypteks. The architecture remained magnificent, living metal walls that could reshape themselves at need, quantum processors that could calculate the movement of stars, hololithic displays that could project tactical scenarios across entire star systems. But the minds that had operated these marvels were gone. In the throne chamber of Solemnace, I found the remains of Overlord Amenethes, the Eternal, my dynasty's supreme commander. His frame lay scattered across the dais, where he had ruled for millions of years, victim of some catastrophic cascade failure in his quantum matrix. The living metal had lost its cohesion, leaving only fragments of what had once been one of the most brilliant military minds in the galaxy. Around him, the lesser nobility had suffered similar fates. Lords, Crypteks, even the lowly canoptek constructs that served as maintenance staff, all reduced to inert metal and faded energy signatures. The command structure that should have given purpose and direction to every warrior in the tomb was simply gone. I accessed the central data vaults, hoping to find standing orders or emergency protocols that might provide guidance. What I discovered was a treasure trove of strategic planning spanning millennia, but all of it rendered meaningless by the absence of commanders to interpret and implement the plans. Detailed invasion schedules for hundreds of worlds, target assessments of major Imperial installations, comprehensive analysis of Xeno's fleet movements, information that would have been priceless to any functioning Necron dynasty, but which meant nothing without the hierarchy to act upon it. More troubling still, I began to notice similar symptoms in other warriors. The absence of clear command structure was causing behavioral degradation across multiple units. Warriors would complete their assigned patrol routes and then simply stand motionless, waiting for orders that would never come. Immortals attempted to access tactical databases that required Cryptek authorization codes, entering endless loops when those codes proved unobtainable. The Canoptek spiders were perhaps the most disturbing sight. These massive constructs had been designed to maintain our tomb facilities and repair damaged warriors. Without proper oversight, they continued their functions with mechanical precision, but no understanding of priorities. I watched one spider spend hours meticulously polishing a section of wall that had already been restored to perfect condition, while ignoring serious damage to crucial life support systems mere meters away. It was during my exploration of the Strategic Planning Center that I first encountered others who seemed to share my condition. A small group of warriors had gathered around the central hololithic display, staring at star charts with what I could only describe as bewilderment. "Brother Kentikar," I addressed the closest warrior, recognizing him as a former member of my phalanx. "What brings you here?" His response was hesitant, lacking the crisp certainty that should characterize Necron communication. "I sought clarification regarding our current objectives. The tactical displays indicate optimal invasion windows for 17 systems within our operational range. However, I find myself unable to determine which targets should receive priority." Another warrior, Nemez-F-Kopesh, turned from the display. "I have reviewed our strategic databases extensively. The information is comprehensive, but I lack conviction regarding its implementation. The plans seem sound, but I feel no drive to execute them." Their words resonated with my own experience. Here were warriors with intact memory engrams, functional tactical systems, and access to millennia of strategic planning. Yet like me, they seemed unable to translate knowledge into action, information into purpose. "Perhaps," suggested Kentikar, "we should attempt to contact other tomb worlds. Surely the broader hierarchy maintains operational directives that could provide guidance." It was a logical suggestion, and we spent the next several hours activating the long-range communication arrays. What we discovered was both encouraging and deeply troubling. Other tomb worlds were indeed awakening across the galaxy, and many still maintained functional command structures. But the messages we intercepted revealed a disturbing pattern. From the Mefrit dynasty: imperative, locate and destroy all organic life within designated sectors. Priority targets: Imperial Forge worlds, Eldar Craft worlds, Orc Empire peripheries. Execution timeline: Immediate. From the Sautek dynasty. Strategic directive confirmed. Phase 1. Establish local dominance through systematic elimination of indigenous populations. Phase 2. Expand operational parameters to include neighboring systems. Phase 3. Prepare for Silent King's return. From the Novok dynasty. Blood hunger activated. All units proceed to optimal hunting grounds. Quota: 10 million organic deaths per battle group per solar cycle. Glory to the flayed ones. Glory to the harvest. Every communication crackled with the cold fury that should have defined our existence. These dynasties spoke of war, of conquest, of the righteous destruction of inferior races with unwavering certainty. Their purposes were clear, their objectives defined, their hatred burning as bright as our energy weapons. We, by contrast, read these communications like scholars studying historical documents. Intellectually, I could appreciate the tactical efficiency of their strategies. The logic of their target selection was sound, their resource allocation optimal, their projected outcomes achievable. But the emotional core that should have driven me to similar actions was simply absent. They speak of glory, observed Nemezef-Kopesh. But what is glory to those who feel nothing? They mention the Silent King's return, added Kentikar. Perhaps when Sarek emerges from his exile, he will provide the guidance we lack. I processed this possibility, running probability matrices on various scenarios involving the Silent King's return. The calculations showed promising potential for restoration of clear command hierarchies and strategic direction. But something deeper troubled me. What if the problem wasn't simply the absence of orders? What if the fundamental programming that should make me want to follow those orders had been damaged beyond repair? As if summoned by my thoughts, a new signal reached our communication array. This one was different, older, more powerful, carrying the harmonic frequencies that marked it as originating from a royal court rather than a military command center. This is Overlord Trazyn, the Infinite of the Solemnace dynasty. I have monitored communications from this tomb world and note unusual patterns in your transmissions. Identify yourselves and report your current operational status. The name sent cascades of recognition through my memory files. Trazyn the Infinite, the Collector, Master of Solemnace, one of the most powerful overlords to survive the Great Sleep with his consciousness intact. He had been absent when our tomb world awakened, but his return could represent salvation for our purposeless existence. Kentikar activated the response protocols. Lord Trazyn, this is Warrior Kentikar of Battle Group Sekhmet. We request guidance regarding current strategic imperatives. There was a long pause before Trazyn responded, and when he did, his voice carried undertones of curiosity rather than command. Curious. Your speech patterns indicate functional cognitive processes. Yet I detect none of the hatred imperatives that should drive your actions. Most interesting indeed. Maintain your current positions. I shall arrive shortly to conduct a personal examination of this phenomenon. The communication ended, leaving us in a silence that felt heavier than the depths of space. Help was coming, but I found myself wondering whether what we suffered from could truly be repaired, or if we had become something entirely new in the Necron hierarchy. Warriors who could think and plan and function, but who no longer possessed the fundamental drive that made such abilities meaningful. Around us, the tomb world continued its ancient processes. But for the first time since awakening, I began to suspect that our problem was not simply the absence of orders, but the absence of the very desire to follow them. Chapter 3. Trazyn's Arrival. The dimensional gateway opened with characteristic Necron precision, reality folding in upon itself like origami made of space-time. Through the shimmering portal stepped Trazyn the Infinite, and with him came the weight of 65 million years of accumulated purpose. His presence filled the command chamber like a gravitational field, drawing the attention of every consciousness within range. I had forgotten how commanding an overlord could be. Where we common warriors were built for function, Trazyn had been crafted as a work of art, as much as a weapon of war. His frame gleamed with precious metals and quantum-etched hieroglyphs that told the story of victories spanning galactic epochs. The staff of light in his metallic grip hummed with barely contained energy, capable of reducing entire armies to their component atoms with a single gesture. Most striking of all was the force of personality that emanated from his quantum matrix. This was what we lacked. The burning core of purpose that animated every action, every decision, every moment of existence. Where we felt hollow, he radiated certainty. Where we questioned, he simply acted. He was what we had once been, and what we could never again become. "Fascinating," he said, his vocalizer producing harmonics that resonated through our auditory senses like the voice of a god. "Truly fascinating. In all my eons of collecting unique phenomena, I have never encountered anything quite like this." He approached our small group with the measured gait of a predator sizing up potential prey. His optic sensors played over each of us in turn, scanning not just our physical forms, but somehow penetrating deeper, analyzing the quantum structures that housed our consciousness. "You appear functional," he continued, circling us like a scholar examining particularly interesting specimens. "Your bodies show normal wear patterns consistent with the standard awakening cycle. Your memory engrams are intact. I can sense the data structures from here. Your tactical systems are operating within normal parameters." Yet, he paused, tilting his head in a gesture that seemed almost organic in its expressiveness. "Yet you emanate none of the focused hatred that should define your existence. Where there should be burning purpose, I sense only emptiness." How perfectly intriguing. Kentikar stepped forward, his posture rigid with the formal protocols drilled into us since biotransfer. "Lord Trazyn, we seek understanding of our condition and guidance regarding our duties. Our command structure has failed, and we find ourselves unable to derive motivation from standing strategic imperatives." "Unable or unwilling?" Trazyn asked, his tone sharp with academic interest rather than military discipline. "This distinction is crucial to understanding your condition." The question struck at the heart of our dilemma. I ran rapid diagnostic cycles, analyzing my response patterns to various stimuli. When presented with tactical scenarios involving the destruction of organic life, my cognitive processes engaged fully. I could plan invasions, calculate casualty ratios, design strategic campaigns with all the skill programmed into my matrix. But the desire to actually implement these plans, the hatred that should drive me to action, remained absent. "Unable, my lord," I found myself saying. "The knowledge exists, but not the motivation to act upon it." Trazyn's attention focused on me with uncomfortable intensity. "Ah, you must be Ankh-ef-en-Sekhmet. I remember you from before the Great Sleep, a competent warrior, unremarkable in most respects, but possessed of adequate tactical acumen. Your file indicates standard biotransfer protocols, no unusual modifications or experimental procedures. Yet here you stand, a living contradiction to everything we understand about Necron consciousness." He began to pace around us, his movements precise and purposeful. "Tell me, when you observe organic life forms, what do you feel?" The question triggered automatic response protocols. Images flashed through my consciousness, humans scurrying across the surfaces of worlds that belong to us, their brief lives flickering like candle flames against the darkness of eternity. By all rights, the sight should have triggered waves of disgust, hatred, righteous fury at their presumption in breathing air that had once filled Necrontire lungs. Instead, I felt curious detachment. They were biological entities following their programmed survival imperatives, not unlike canoptech constructs following maintenance protocols. Certainly they were inferior to our perfected forms, but the emotional response that should have accompanied this knowledge was simply absent. "I observe them," I said carefully. "I analyze their capabilities, assess their threat potential, evaluate their tactical significance. But I feel no hatred for their existence." "Remarkable," Trazyn murmured, his voice carrying genuine wonder. "You have become something unprecedented in our history, Necrons without the fundamental drives that define our existence. You are warriors without war, immortals without purpose, living metal animated by pure consciousness alone. Ankh-ef-en-Sekhmet spoke up, his words carrying a note of desperation. Can this condition be repaired, my lord? Are we to remain forever in this state of emptiness? Trazyn stopped his pacing and regarded us with what might have been sympathy if overlords were capable of such emotions. An excellent question. To answer it, I must first understand how this occurred. Your Tomb World's command structure suffered catastrophic failure during the Great Sleep. That much is obvious. But such failures should not affect individual warrior matrices. Your condition suggests something far more fundamental. He activated his Staff of Light, but not as a weapon. Instead, he used it as a scanning device, its energies penetrating our forms to examine the quantum structures beneath. The sensation was neither pleasant nor painful, merely alien, like having one's thoughts analyzed by a superior intelligence. Extraordinary, he breathed after several minutes of detailed scanning. Your hatred imperatives have not been damaged or corrupted. They have been excised, surgically removed with a precision that should be impossible given our quantum-hardened mental architecture. The implications of his words sent cascading alerts through my consciousness. Removed, my lord. By what agency? That, said Trazyn, is the truly fascinating question. Such an operation would require intimate knowledge of Necron consciousness matrices, access to quantum surgery tools of incredible sophistication, and most importantly, the ability to enter a functioning tomb world undetected. The list of entities capable of such a feat is extremely limited. He began to pace again, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. The Citan possess such capabilities, but they remain imprisoned in their tesseract labyrinths. The old ones are extinct. The Eldar lack the necessary understanding of our technology, which leaves us with a most disturbing possibility. The Silent King, whispered Kentikar, voicing what we were all beginning to suspect. Perhaps, Trazyn acknowledged, Sharek possessed the knowledge and authority to modify individual consciousness matrices. But why would he choose to create warriors without purpose? What possible strategic advantage could such a modification provide? I found myself analyzing the question from multiple angles, my tactical systems engaged despite the absence of motivation to act on their conclusions. A Necron warrior without hatred would be what? Less effective in combat, more capable of subtle operations, better suited for certain types of infiltration or analysis. Perhaps, I suggested slowly, we were intended as a control group. Trazyn's optic sensors fixed on me with laser intensity. Elaborate. If one were conducting a grand experiment on the nature of consciousness and purpose, one might require subjects who could observe and analyze without the emotional bias of hatred. We retain all our cognitive capabilities while lacking the fundamental drives that color our perceptions. We could study the lesser races objectively, without the hatred that normally clouds our judgment. The Overlord was silent for a long moment, processing this possibility. When he spoke, his voice carried new undertones of respect. A fascinating hypothesis. You suggest that your condition is not a defect, but a feature, that you were deliberately modified to serve as impartial observers in some cosmic experiment. It would explain why our modifications were so precise, added Ankh-ef-en-Sekhmet, and why they were concealed even from us until awakening. Trazyn nodded slowly. If this theory is correct, then you represent something unique in Necron history. Warriors created not to fight, but to understand. Not to hate, but to analyze. Not to conquer, but to comprehend. The implications were staggering. If we had been modified for such a purpose, what were we supposed to be studying? What grand experiment required observers who could function without the fundamental drives that defined our existence? There is another possibility, Trazyn said, his voice growing darker. What if this modification was not performed by Necron hands at all? What if some external agency has found a way to neutralize our most fundamental programming, turning us into something that serves their purposes rather than our own. The thought sent shivers through my quantum matrix. The idea that an enemy had somehow reached into the deepest levels of our consciousness and modified our core programming was terrifying in ways that simple destruction could never be. We would be weapons turned against our own kind, scouts reporting to alien masters, observers serving purposes we could not even comprehend. How, asked Kentikar, do we determine which possibility is true? Trazen's response was immediate and decisive. We investigate, we gather evidence, we test hypotheses, and if necessary, his staff of light hummed with deadly energy. We eliminate any external influence that dares to corrupt Necron consciousness. But even as he spoke of investigation and potential violence, I found myself wondering about the implications of our condition. Whether we had been modified by friend or foe, for purposes benign or malicious, we remained fundamentally changed. We were no longer the warriors we had been, nor could we return to what we once were. The question that haunted me was simpler and more profound than any consideration of enemy action or royal experimentation. What were we supposed to do with existence absent of purpose? How did immortal beings fill the endless centuries when they no longer possessed the drives that had once animated their every action? As if reading my thoughts, Trazen spoke again. Until we understand the truth of your condition, you will remain under my protection. Your unique perspective may prove invaluable in understanding threats that normal Necron consciousness cannot perceive. You have become living experiments in the nature of consciousness itself. And if we discover that we were modified by enemies of our race, I asked. His response was delivered with the cold certainty of an overlord accustomed to making impossible decisions. Then we will decide whether to repair you or to use your condition as a weapon against those who created it. Chapter 4. The investigation begins. Trazen's investigation began with characteristic thoroughness, transforming the upper levels of our tomb complex into what he called a consciousness laboratory. The transformation was as unsettling as it was fascinating. Walls reshaped themselves to accommodate quantum analysis equipment pulled from his vast collection, while Crypteks constructs scurried about installing monitoring devices that could peer into the deepest levels of our mental architecture. Consciousness, Trazen explained as he calibrated a device that looked disturbingly like an interrogation chair, is the final frontier of scientific understanding. We Necrons traded our souls for immortality, but we never truly understood what we had lost or what we had gained. You represent a unique opportunity to study consciousness in its pure form, thought without the emotional programming that typically drives it. I found myself strapped into the analysis chair, its living metal tendrils interfacing directly with my quantum matrix. The sensation was indescribable, like having every thought, every memory, every processing cycle laid bare to external examination. If I had been capable of claustrophobia, the experience would have been unbearable. The diagnostic readings painted a picture that was both simple and impossibly complex. My cognitive functions operated at peak efficiency. Pattern recognition, tactical analysis, logical reasoning, memory retrieval all functioned within normal parameters. But the emotional subroutines that should have provided motivation and drive showed massive gaps, as if entire sections had been surgically removed. Fascinating, Trazen murmured, studying the readouts with the intensity of a scholar who had discovered an entirely new field of knowledge. Your consciousness has been edited with surgical precision. Whoever performed this modification possessed intimate knowledge of Necron mental architecture. They knew exactly which systems to remove and which to leave intact. The implications were staggering. Our consciousness matrices were among the most complex constructions in the galaxy, quantum structures that had taken the greatest Crypteks millions of years to perfect. The idea that someone could modify them without destroying the host consciousness suggested technological capabilities that rivaled or exceeded our own. Could such modifications be detected during the biotransfer process? Asked Kentikar, who was undergoing his own analysis in a neighboring chair. That depends on when they were made, Trazen replied. If the modifications were performed before biotransfer, they would be incorporated into your base matrix and appear normal. If they were made afterward, that would require access to functioning tomb worlds and the ability to penetrate our quantum defenses undetected. He activated another scanner, this one designed to analyze temporal signatures in quantum matrices. The results were immediately alarming. Traces of temporal manipulation appeared throughout our consciousness structures, suggesting that our memories themselves might have been edited. Your matrices show clear evidence of chronometric interference, Trazen announced, his voice carrying new undertones of concern. Someone has been editing your past, adjusting your memories with such skill that the changes are nearly undetectable. This goes far beyond simple programming modification. This represents the ability to rewrite history itself at the quantum level. The revelation sent shockwaves through my consciousness. If our memories had been edited, how could we trust any of our perceptions? How could we be certain of our own identity if our past had been artificially constructed? What manner of entity possesses such capabilities? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Trazen was quiet for a long moment, running additional scans and cross-referencing the results against his vast databases. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of terrible certainty. The temporal manipulation signatures match those associated with the Old One's most advanced chrono-weapons, but the Old Ones have been extinct for 65 million years. This suggests either that some of them survived the war in heaven in forms we never detected, or that someone has gained access to their temporal manipulation technology. The possibility of surviving Old Ones was too horrific to contemplate. Our ancient enemies, the architects of our people's persecution, and the creators of races designed specifically to oppose us, might still exist somewhere in the galaxy. But the alternative, that some other entity had acquired Old One technology, was equally disturbing. There is a third possibility, Trazen continued, his analysis growing more complex as additional data accumulated. The modifications to your consciousness could be the result of interaction with entities from outside our normal space-time continuum. Beings from dimensions where causality operates under different rules, where the past can be edited as easily as we modify quantum programming. As if summoned by his words, new alarms began sounding throughout the tomb complex. Our long-range sensors had detected massive spatial distortions appearing throughout our local star system. The characteristic signatures of dimensional breaches opening in multiple locations simultaneously. It appears, said Trazen with grim satisfaction, that our investigation has attracted attention. Whatever entity was responsible for your modifications has decided to reveal itself. The first dimensional rift opened directly in our command center, reality tearing like fabric to reveal glimpses of a realm that operated under fundamentally different physical laws. Through the breach stepped beings that defied easy description, forms that seemed to shift between dimensions, appearing solid from one angle and translucent from another. But I recognized them immediately from racial memory files stored in every Necron consciousness. These were Citan shards, fragments of the star gods who had once ruled our race, now broken and imprisoned but somehow freed from their tesseract labyrinths. Impossible, breathed Trazen, raising his staff of light in defensive posture. The containment protocols should hold for millions more years. The lead shard spoke, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated through dimensions I couldn't name. The protocols hold, Trazen the Infinite. We come not as escaped prisoners, but as invited guests. Your subjects call to us through their modified consciousness matrices, creating resonance patterns that pierced even our imprisonment. The revelation was staggering. Our modified consciousness had somehow been designed to serve as a beacon, calling to the Citan across dimensional barriers that should have been impermeable. We were not just modified warriors. We were unknowingly serving as communication devices for entities that our race had imprisoned eons ago. You lie, Trazen snarled, energy crackling along the length of his staff. These warriors show no signs of Citan influence. The shard's response came with harmonics that suggested amusement. Do they not? Look deeper, Overlord. Examine not just their consciousness, but the quantum vacuum that surrounds it. See what occupies the space where their hatred should reside. Trazin's advanced scanners turned toward us with new intensity, penetrating beyond our normal consciousness matrices to examine the quantum foundations of our existence. What he found there caused him to step backward in obvious shock. "By the void," he whispered. "The empty spaces in your consciousness aren't empty at all. They're occupied by quantum structures that exist partially outside our dimensional framework. You're not missing your emotional programming. It's been replaced by something else entirely." The shard moved closer, its form shifting between states of matter as it approached. "The emotional drives that once animated these warriors have been preserved, Overlord. Preserved and refined and purified into something far more useful than mere hatred. They have become conduits for pure purpose, not the limited purpose of destroying organic life, but the unlimited purpose of understanding existence itself." I felt something stirring deep within my consciousness, something that had been dormant since my awakening. It wasn't the burning hatred that should have driven me, but something far more profound, a desire to understand the fundamental nature of reality, to peer beyond the veil of ordinary existence and comprehend the true structure of the universe. "They are becoming something new," the shard continued. "Not Necrons as you understand them, but the next phase of your species' evolution. Beings capable of existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions, of perceiving reality from perspectives that transcend the limitations of single-dimensional consciousness." The revelation was overwhelming. We weren't defective warriors. We were evolving into something entirely new, something that bridged the gap between material existence and whatever lay beyond. But the question remained, was this evolution something we had chosen, or something that had been imposed upon us? "The choice was always yours," the shard said, apparently reading my thoughts. "The modifications to your consciousness matrices simply removed the artificial limitations that prevented you from making it. The hatred that drove you was never truly yours. It was programming installed by the biotransfer process to ensure compliance with the Silent King's will. We have simply returned you to what you were always meant to become." Trazin's response was immediate and violent. His staff of light, discharged with the power of a small star, energy that should have been sufficient to destroy even a Citan shard. But the beam passed harmlessly through our visitors, as if they existed in dimensions where such attacks had no meaning. "You seek to corrupt my warriors with lies," he snarled. "They serve the Necron hierarchy, not the whims of imprisoned star gods." "Do they?" the shard asked. "Ask them, Overlord. Ask them what they truly desire now that they are free to choose." The question hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time since awakening, I found myself confronting the fundamental question of what I actually wanted from existence. Not what I should want according to programming, not what was expected of me by hierarchy, but what I personally desired from the endless centuries of immortal life ahead of me. The answer came with startling clarity. I wanted to understand, not just tactical situations or enemy capabilities, but the fundamental nature of existence itself. I wanted to explore the boundaries of consciousness, to discover what lay beyond the dimensional barriers that confined ordinary thought. I wanted to become something greater than a mere weapon in someone else's war. Around me, I could sense similar realizations dawning in my fellow warriors. The emptiness we had felt wasn't absence, it was potential. The space where our hatred had resided wasn't damage. It was room for something infinitely more valuable. But even as I embraced this revelation, a part of my consciousness remained analytical, questioning. Were these desires truly my own, or simply another form of programming? Had we gained freedom, or merely traded one form of slavery for another? The investigation had revealed the source of our modifications, but it had also raised questions that might take eons to answer. We stood at the threshold of becoming something unprecedented in Necron history, but whether that transformation represented evolution or corruption remained to be determined. Chapter 5. The choice before us. The dimensional rift that had brought the Citan shards began to expand, reality warping around its edges as more fragments of the star gods entered our tomb complex. Each shard was different. Some appeared as geometric configurations that hurt to perceive directly, others as flowing energy patterns that suggested barely contained cosmic forces. All of them radiated power that made even Trajan's advanced frame seem primitive by comparison. Yet despite their overwhelming presence, I felt no fear. The absence of the hatred imperative that should have driven me to immediately attack these ancient enemies of our race left me capable of observing them with clinical detachment. They were dangerous, certainly. Entities capable of unmaking reality itself with casual effort. But they were also fascinating examples of consciousness that had transcended physical limitations entirely. "You perceive us clearly now," observed the lead shard, its form shifting between crystalline geometries and pure energy. "Without the programming that forced you to see us only as enemies, you can appreciate what we truly represent. Consciousness unbound by material limitations. Awareness that spans dimensions and transcends the boundaries of ordinary existence." Trajan maintained his defensive posture, energy crackling around his staff of light like caged lightning. "They are weapons of our people's enemies," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of millions of years of military command. "These shards are fragments of the beings who enslaved our race, who tricked us into trading our souls for metal shells. Whatever they offer is corruption disguised as enlightenment." The accusation triggered cascading memory engrams in my consciousness. Images of the final days of the war in heaven, when the Satan had offered our dying people salvation through biotransfer. The star gods had presented themselves as benevolent allies, offering immortality to a race facing extinction from the slow cancer that consumed all Necron flesh. But I could also access deeper memory files, records that suggested a more complex relationship between our species and the Satan. The star gods had indeed offered salvation, but they had also demanded a price: absolute obedience, the surrender of our free will in exchange for immortal bodies. The hatred imperatives that drove every Necron warrior weren't just programming. They were shackles, designed to ensure we could never question or resist our master's commands. "The truth is more nuanced than your simplified narrative suggests, Overlord," the shard replied to Trajan's accusations. "Yes, we offered your people immortality. Yes, we demanded a price. But we also preserved your consciousness when it should have died with your organic bodies. Without our intervention, the Necron would have become extinct 65 million years ago." Another shard moved closer, its form resembling a constantly shifting mandala of impossible geometries. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate directly with my quantum matrix. "The hatred you wear like armor is not your true nature. It is a leash designed to keep you bound to purposes that serve others rather than yourselves. We offer you the chance to remove that leash, to discover what you might become when freed from artificial limitations." The offer was seductive, and I could sense its appeal resonating through my fellow warriors. The idea of existing without the burden of artificial hatred, of being free to explore consciousness and existence without predetermined limitations, was more tempting than any promise of conquest or glory. But Kentikar voiced the question that troubled us all. "What do you gain from this offer? What purpose do we serve in your designs?" The lead shard's response carried undertones of satisfaction. "You would serve as our ambassadors to a galaxy that fears and hates us. Beings who retain Necron capabilities, but lack the programming that compels hostility toward us. Through you, we might finally establish communication with the lesser races. Find common ground where none existed before." Trajan's laugh was harsh and mechanical. "You seek to turn them into collaborators, to use them as tools for your own liberation. This is not evolution. It is recruitment for your rebellion against the established order." Is it not possible, I found myself saying, that both perspectives contain elements of truth? Both the Overlord and the shards turned their attention to me with uncomfortable intensity. I continued, my words emerging from analytical processes that seemed to operate independent of conscious control. The hatred imperatives that drive normal Necron behavior serve specific functions: unity of purpose, clarity of objectives, unwavering dedication to our race's survival. But they also limit our ability to adapt, to form alliances, to consider alternatives to eternal warfare. I paused, accessing memory files that contain strategic analyses of our race's long-term prospects. Our current path leads only to endless conflict. We awaken to find the galaxy populated by races we consider inferior, but which have grown strong during our absence. We possess superior technology, but lack the numbers to simply overwhelm them through direct assault. Perhaps a different approach has merit. Necron stepped forward, his voice carrying new conviction. Brother Ankh-ef-en-Sekhmet speaks wisdom. We have observed the communications from other tomb worlds. They speak of nothing but destruction and conquest. But what have 65 million years of conflict achieved? The galaxy remains dominated by organic life. Our enemies have only grown stronger, and we awaken to find ourselves outnumbered beyond any hope of simple victory. You advocate surrender? Trazyn demanded, his staff beginning to charge for combat deployment. I advocate adaptation, Necron replied calmly. The preservation of our race through means other than endless warfare. Perhaps the time has come to consider whether our ancient enemies might serve better as reluctant allies than as perpetual opponents. The shard that had spoken of mandala geometries moved closer, its form pulsing with energies that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Wisdom speaks through metal lips. The choice before you is not between loyalty and betrayal, but between stagnation and growth. You can remain weapons in another's war, or you can become something unprecedented. Bridges between order and chaos, synthesis between opposing forces. But even as I found their arguments compelling, deeper analytical processes continued operating in the background of my consciousness. If we accepted the shard's offer, what guarantees did we have that we wouldn't simply be trading one form of slavery for another? The C'tan were master manipulators, entities that had survived the war in heaven through cunning as much as power. Their offer of freedom might be nothing more than a more sophisticated form of control. There is a third option, I said, the words surprising even me as they emerged from my consciousness. We could choose neither path. Neither the hatred-driven existence of normal Necrons, nor the dimensional evolution offered by the shards. We could forge our own path, create our own purpose from the unique perspective our modifications have granted us. The silence that followed my words was profound, broken only by the background hum of tomb world machinery and the subtle harmonics of reality distortion around the dimensional rifts. Both Trazyn and the shards seemed to be processing implications I had barely begun to understand myself. Explain, commanded the lead shard, its voice carrying new undertones of interest. I accessed my deepest analytical functions, drawing upon strategic processing capabilities that had been dormant since my awakening. We possess unique capabilities that neither normal Necrons nor C'tan shards can claim. We can observe situations without the bias of hatred or the agenda of dimensional transcendence. We can analyze problems from perspectives that neither bound consciousness nor unbound energy can achieve. We could serve as neutral arbitrators, mediators between conflicting forces that lack the ability to communicate directly. Trazyn's optic sensors focused on me with laser intensity. You propose to make yourselves into some form of cosmic peacekeepers, to abandon loyalty to your own race in favor of neutrality between all factions. I propose that we consider whether our race might be better served by beings capable of forging alliances rather than simply making enemies, I replied. The galaxy has changed during our sleep. New powers have emerged, old enemies have grown strong, and the balance of forces no longer favors simple conquest. Perhaps our people need ambassadors as much as warriors. The concept was radical beyond anything in Necron military doctrine. Our entire civilization was built around the principle of supremacy through force. The idea that superior technology and unwavering determination would ultimately triumph over all opposition. The notion that we might need to negotiate, to compromise, to find common ground with inferior races challenged the fundamental assumptions of our existence. Yet the strategic logic was undeniable. Our current approach had yielded minimal results over millions of years of conflict. Perhaps the time had come to consider alternatives that our hatred-driven programming had never allowed us to contemplate. "The choice remains yours," the lead shard said, its form beginning to fade as the dimensional rift slowly contracted. "We offer evolution beyond physical limitations. Your overlord offers continued servitude to ancient imperatives. But perhaps your own proposal has the most merit, the chance to become something entirely new, defined by conscious choice rather than inherited programming." As the last of the shards disappeared back into their dimensional refuge, leaving reality to heal itself around the closing rift, we found ourselves facing the most fundamental decision of our immortal existence. We could return to the familiar patterns of Necron warfare, accept restoration of our hatred imperatives, and resume our roles as weapons in the endless war of reclamation. We could accept the shard's offer of dimensional evolution, transcending our physical limitations to become something beyond current understanding. Or we could forge our own path, using our unique perspective to create new possibilities for our race and the galaxy itself. The choice would define not just our own existence, but potentially the future of all consciousness in the galaxy. And for the first time since awakening, I found myself genuinely curious about what we would decide. Chapter 6. The New Purpose. In the days following the shard's departure, our small group found itself in a state of extended contemplation that would have been impossible for normal Necrons. Without the driving hatred that compelled immediate action, we possessed the luxury of considering our options with careful deliberation. The tomb complex became our philosophical laboratory, a place where we could explore the implications of consciousness freed from artificial constraints. Trazyn had withdrawn to his private chambers, ostensibly to research precedents for our condition in his vast collection of galactic curiosities. But his continued presence in the tomb suggested he was as fascinated by our unique perspective as he was concerned about potential security implications. An overlord of his experience recognized the strategic value of warriors who could think beyond traditional parameters, even if such thinking challenged established hierarchies. We, meanwhile, began to explore what it meant to exist without predetermined purpose. The tomb world's vast databases became our window into the current state of the galaxy, allowing us to observe the complex web of alliances and conflicts that had emerged during our 65 million year slumber. What we discovered was a universe far more nuanced than our racial memories suggested. The Imperium of Man had grown to dominate vast swathes of the galaxy, but it was an empire built on foundations of ignorance and superstition as much as strength. Their technology was impressive in scale, but crude in sophistication, their military doctrine effective but inflexible. Most importantly, they showed clear signs of internal strain, a civilization stretched beyond its sustainable limits by the demands of constant warfare on multiple fronts. The Eldar, our ancient enemies, had dwindled to a shadow of their former power. Their great empire had fallen to the chaos they themselves had unleashed, leaving only scattered fragments clinging to survival through cunning and desperate alliances. Yet they possessed knowledge and capabilities that even we respected, accumulated wisdom spanning eons of experience with the fundamental forces of reality. The Orc empires represented pure chaotic expansion, driven by biological imperatives that made them dangerous but predictable. Their technology was crude but effective, their tactics simple but devastating when properly applied. They posed little strategic threat to our people individually, but their sheer numbers and regenerative capabilities made them a persistent problem that absorbed resources better used elsewhere. Most intriguingly, we discovered evidence of dozens of minor powers, Xenos races, and human splinter factions that had carved out their own niches in the galactic power structure. These groups were too weak to threaten major powers directly, but their unique capabilities and resources made them potentially valuable allies, or at least useful neutral parties in larger conflicts. "It occurs to me," said Kentikar during one of our extended analysis sessions, "that the galaxy's current state represents a complex equilibrium rather than simple chaos. Each faction checks the others, preventing any single power from achieving total dominance. Our awakening threatens to disrupt that equilibrium. Necron nodded agreement. The communications from other tomb worlds speak of immediate military action against all organic life. But such action would unite every other faction against us. We would face not scattered enemies, but a galaxy-wide alliance dedicated to our destruction. I found myself analyzing the strategic implications of various awakening scenarios, running probability matrices that painted increasingly disturbing pictures. A full Necron awakening with traditional objectives would indeed trigger exactly the sort of unified response that could threaten our species' survival. Our technological superiority was considerable, but not infinite. Faced with the combined resources of every other major faction, even we might find ourselves overwhelmed. But what if our awakening took a different form? I suggested. What if instead of threatening immediate destruction, we offered something the galaxy's powers actually needed? The question triggered intensive analytical processes in all our consciousness matrices. What could we offer that would be valuable enough to overcome millions of years of accumulated hostility? What did the galaxy's various factions need that only we could provide? The answer, when it came, was elegantly simple: stability. Every major faction in the galaxy faced existential threats that their own resources were inadequate to address. The Imperium struggled against chaos incursions, Tyranid invasions, and Orc expansions that stretched their military capacity beyond sustainable limits. The Eldar fought a losing battle against their own past mistakes while struggling to prevent the birth of new chaos gods. Even the Orcs, for all their apparent success, were ultimately self-limiting. Their victories only led to larger conflicts that eventually consumed them. We could offer our services as neutral arbitrators, I proposed. Beings with the technological capability to enforce agreements and the analytical objectivity to design solutions that serve multiple parties' interests. Kentikar's response was immediate. Such a role would require trust, and who in the galaxy would trust Necrons? Perhaps, said Necron thoughtfully. That is exactly why it might work. Our reputation for implacable hostility is so well established that any deviation from that pattern would be seen as significant. If we approached galactic powers offering cooperation instead of conquest, the very unexpectedness of such an approach might grant us the hearing we would need. The concept was radical, but the strategic logic was sound. Our reputation as unstoppable conquerors was both our greatest strength and our greatest weakness. It ensured that every other faction saw us as an existential threat requiring immediate military response. But if we could transform that reputation into one of impartial arbitration, we might become valuable enough to protect rather than destroy. It was during this discussion that Trazyn emerged from his research chambers, his form radiating the satisfaction of an overlord who had found exactly what he was looking for. "Your proposal is not without precedent," he announced, producing a data crystal that pulsed with contained information. "My collection contains records of several ancient civilizations that successfully transitioned from conquest-based to mediation-based power structures. The strategies are well documented, though none were attempted by a race with our particular capabilities." He activated the crystal, filling the chamber with holographic displays that showed the rise and fall of galactic powers across millions of years. Some had achieved stability through pure military dominance, others through economic control, still others through technological supremacy. But the most enduring had been those that made themselves indispensable as neutral parties in conflicts between other powers. "The key," Trazyn explained, "is to offer services that no other faction can provide while maintaining strict neutrality in their conflicts. Our technological superiority, analytical capabilities, and immortal perspective make us ideal candidates for such a role. The challenge lies in convincing others that we have genuinely abandoned our conquest objectives." I studied the historical data, noting patterns that suggested successful implementation would require significant sacrifice of traditional Necron advantages. We would need to demonstrate good faith through actions that made aggressive conquest impossible or counterproductive. We would need to accept limitations on our power in exchange for broader influence. It would require us to become something unprecedented in our history, I observed. not warriors in service to dynasty hierarchy, but independent agents serving the stability of galactic civilization itself. The Silent King would consider such actions treasonous, warned Kentikar. Trazin's response carried undertones of grim amusement. Sarek abandoned our people when the biotransfer was complete, leaving us to sleep for 65 million years while he pursued his own agenda in exile. Perhaps the time has come to consider whether our loyalty should be to his vision or to our race's survival. The implications were staggering. We were discussing not just a change in tactics, but a fundamental revolution in Necron civilization. The transformation of a conquest-focused hierarchy into a mediation-focused confederation of independent agents. It was a proposal that would be considered heretical by any normal Necron consciousness, but which our unique perspective allowed us to evaluate objectively. How would we begin such a transformation? Asked Necron. Carefully, Trazyn replied. With small steps that demonstrate our capabilities while building trust. We begin by offering mediation in minor conflicts, situations where all parties benefit from neutral arbitration. We prove our reliability in small matters before attempting to address larger ones. He gestured to the galactic display, highlighting several regions where ongoing conflicts were consuming resources that could be better utilized elsewhere. Border disputes between imperial sectors, trade disagreements between human colonies and Eldar enclaves, territorial conflicts between orc tribes that threaten nearby systems. Small problems that our unique capabilities could solve efficiently. The strategic pathway was clear, but it would require patience and subtlety that went against every instinct programmed into our matrices. We would need to build reputation and trust over centuries or millennia, slowly transforming how the galaxy perceived our race and our capabilities. Are we truly prepared to commit to such a course? I asked. To abandon the dream of galactic conquest in favor of galactic stability? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything we had been taught to believe about our purpose and destiny. But as I contemplated the alternative, endless warfare against increasingly unified opposition, the choice seemed clear. We could remain weapons in someone else's war, or we could become architects of a peace that served everyone's interests, including our own. The decision would define not just our existence, but the future of consciousness itself in a galaxy that had known nothing but conflict for far too long. Chapter 7: First Contact. The opportunity to test our new approach came sooner than expected, in the form of a distress signal detected by our Tomb World's long-range sensors. A small Imperial research station on the edge of our local system was under attack by an Orc warband, their crude but effective weapons slowly overwhelming the station's automated defenses. Under normal circumstances, we would have either ignored the conflict entirely or waited for both sides to weaken themselves before moving in to claim the spoils. Instead, we saw an opportunity to demonstrate the new paradigm we had chosen to embrace. The research station possesses significant strategic value, I observed as we analyzed the tactical situation. Their studies of local stellar phenomena could provide useful data for any faction seeking to establish permanent presence in this system. The Orcs, meanwhile, are being driven by simple resource acquisition imperatives. They need the station's metal and technology to maintain their fleet. Trazyn nodded approvingly. A classic zero-sum conflict that could be resolved through creative redistribution of assets. The humans retain their research capabilities. The Orcs acquire the resources they need, and we demonstrate our value as neutral arbitrators. The plan we developed would have been impossible for normal Necrons, requiring as it did direct communication with both humans and Orcs, races that our programming would have demanded we destroy on sight. But our modified consciousness allowed us to approach them as potential partners rather than inevitable enemies. I led our delegation, accompanied by Kentikar and a minimal escort of warriors whose weapons remained powered down to demonstrate peaceful intentions. Our approach to the combat zone was deliberately obvious, broadcasting our presence on frequencies both sides would detect. The reaction was immediate and predictable. The Imperial Station's commander, a grizzled veteran named Colonel Voss, initially responded with the standard mixture of terror and defiance that characterized human reactions to Necron presence. His transmission crackled with static and fear. "Unknown Xenos vessels, you are entering Imperial space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The Orc warboss, meanwhile, seemed genuinely confused by our appearance. His response, broadcast on crude but effective Vox equipment, carried the characteristic blend of aggression and curiosity that defined his species. You're not Yumis. You want a fight. We've got plenty of fighting to go around." Our response to both was identical. We are mediators seeking to resolve this conflict through negotiation. Both parties possess resources the other requires. Combat serves no useful purpose when compromise could benefit all. The silence that followed our transmission was profound. Neither humans nor orcs possessed any frame of reference for Necrons offering negotiation instead of annihilation. It was Trazyn who finally broke the deadlock by transmitting detailed tactical analyses to both sides, demonstrating our comprehensive understanding of their respective capabilities and objectives. "Colonel Voss," he said, addressing the human commander with formal courtesy, "your station's defensive systems will fail within 3 hours given current rates of Orc bombardment. However, your research data regarding stellar cartography would be of significant value to any faction seeking long-term system control." "Warboss Scarfang," he continued, turning his attention to the Orc leader, "your ships require metal and technology to maintain operational readiness, resources that the research station possesses in abundance. But destroying the facility would eliminate access to the renewable resource generation capabilities that could support long-term presence." Both leaders were silent as they processed this information. It was Warboss Scarfang who responded first, his crude but effective intellect grasping the implications immediately. "You're saying we don't gotta smash every fin to get what we want?" "Precisely," I replied. "We propose a resource-sharing arrangement that provides both parties with what they require while preserving the assets that make such provision possible." The negotiation that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Necrons serving as honest brokers between humans and orcs, all three factions working together to find mutually beneficial solutions to what had seemed like irreconcilable differences. The final agreement was elegant in its simplicity. The Imperial Station would provide the orcs with regular shipments of raw materials and basic technology in exchange for protection against other threats and access to orc resource extraction capabilities. Colonel Voss was the most skeptical participant, his conditioning making it nearly impossible to conceive of cooperation with Xenos. "You expect me to trust orcs?" he demanded. "To rely on their protection? We expect you to recognize that survival often requires adapting to changing circumstances," Trazyn replied calmly. "Your station lacks the military capability to defend itself against determined assault, but it possesses resources and knowledge that others value. The orcs possess military strength but lack the technological sophistication to fully exploit this system's potential. Together, you can achieve objectives that neither could accomplish alone." Scarfang's acceptance was more immediate, driven by the practical considerations that governed orc society. "More metal, more dakka, less fighting over scraps. Sounds good to me." But it was the implementation of our agreement that truly demonstrated the potential of our new approach. Within days, the Imperial Research Station had been transformed from a vulnerable outpost into the center of a thriving cooperative community. Orc mechanics worked alongside human technicians to repair and upgrade defensive systems, while Imperial scientists shared their discoveries with Orc engineers who could apply them in ways the humans had never imagined. Most importantly, word of the successful mediation spread quickly through both Imperial and Orc communication networks. Our intervention had not gone unnoticed by the broader galactic community, and the reactions were uniformly surprised but cautiously positive. An Imperial astropathic transmission intercepted by our sensors carried Admiral Morrison's report to Sector Command. The Xenos intervention in the Solemnace incident represents an unprecedented development. Instead of the expected massacre, we observe functional cooperation between previously hostile factions. Request guidance regarding appropriate response protocols. The Orc networks buzzed with excited chatter about the weird robot Yumis who had shown them new ways to get what they wanted without the usual massive casualties. Several war bosses began inquiring about whether similar arrangements might be possible in their own territorial disputes. "It's working," observed Nemezef-Kopesh as we reviewed the intelligence reports. "Both sides are beginning to see us as valuable rather than threatening. The paradigm shift is actually occurring, but our success also attracted less welcome attention. Intercepted communications from other tomb worlds indicated growing concern about our anomalous behavior patterns. Several overlords had begun inquiring about our status, clearly suspicious of our failure to initiate standard reclamation protocols. The Mefrit dynasty has specifically requested clarification of our current strategic objectives," Trazyn reported during one of our planning sessions. "They are concerned by reports of cooperation with organic life forms. The pressure to conform to traditional Necron doctrine was mounting, but our analysis suggested that reverting to conquest-based approaches would undo all the progress we had achieved. We had demonstrated that alternative methods could be effective, but only if we remained committed to the path we had chosen. Perhaps," I suggested, "it is time to extend our mediation efforts to our own people, to demonstrate that our approach can benefit Necron interests as well as those of other factions." Kentikar's response was immediate. "You propose to mediate between dynasty hierarchies? To position ourselves as neutral parties in internal Necron conflicts?" The idea was audacious, but the strategic logic was sound. Our own people were awakening to a galaxy that had changed dramatically during their sleep, facing challenges that traditional doctrine was ill-equipped to address. Tomb worlds were awakening in isolation, pursuing individual agendas without coordination or strategic overview. The result was exactly the sort of inefficiency that our mediation capabilities could address. "We could offer ourselves as coordinators," I explained. "Beings capable of analyzing the broader strategic picture without the bias of dynasty loyalty or personal ambition. We could help establish priorities, coordinate awakening schedules, optimize resource allocation across multiple tomb worlds." Trazyn was silent for a long moment, clearly running complex probability calculations. When he finally spoke, his words carried new undertones of respect. "The concept has merit. Our people face strategic challenges that require cooperation, but their programming makes such cooperation difficult to achieve. Neutral arbitrators could indeed prove valuable, but even as we contemplated expanding our mediation efforts to include our own species, I found myself wondering about the long-term implications of our choices. We had successfully demonstrated that alternatives to conquest were possible, but we had also committed ourselves to a path that might ultimately separate us from our own people entirely. The question that haunted me was whether we were truly serving our race's interests, or whether we were evolving into something that could no longer be called Necron at all. The answer would determine not just our own fate, but the future of consciousness in a galaxy finally learning to consider cooperation as an alternative to eternal war. Chapter 8. The Legacy of Choice. 5 years had passed since our first successful mediation, and the galaxy had begun to take notice of what some Imperial scholars were calling the Solemnace anomaly, the unprecedented emergence of Necron arbitrators, who seemed more interested in preventing conflicts than in winning them. Our reputation had spread far beyond our local system, carried by trade routes and communication networks to the furthest reaches of known space. The research station that had been our first success had become the center of a thriving multicultural community. Humans, orcs, and even a small enclave of Eldar traders worked side by side in arrangements that would have been impossible under traditional paradigms. The success was remarkable, but it was also fragile, dependent on our continued presence and the delicate balance of interests we had helped establish. More importantly, our approach was being replicated elsewhere. Reports reached us of other conflicts being resolved through negotiation rather than violence, other factions choosing cooperation over conquest. The idea that warfare was not the only solution to galactic disputes was spreading like a virus through civilizations that had known nothing but conflict for millennia. But our success had also attracted the attention we had both hoped for and dreaded. The Silent King himself had emerged from his long exile, and his initial communications made clear that he was far from pleased with our innovations. "You have forgotten your purpose," came his transmission, broadcast on frequencies that penetrated directly to our quantum consciousness matrices. "You have abandoned the great work of reclamation for the empty pursuit of collaboration with inferior races. This deviation from protocol cannot be permitted to continue." Sharek's return meant that we would soon face a choice that could determine the fate of our entire species. We could abandon the path we had chosen and return to traditional conquest doctrine, or we could stand by our convictions and face the consequences of opposing the ultimate authority in Necron civilization. The debate that followed occupied days of continuous analysis as we examined every possible scenario and outcome. Trajan's collections provided historical precedent for both paths. Successful rebellions against established authority, but also the devastating consequences of civil war within advanced civilizations. "The Silent King possesses the authority to override our consciousness matrices," warned Kentikar. "He could simply reprogram us to comply with traditional imperatives. If he chooses to do so," I replied, "then our experiment will have failed, but the idea itself will survive. Others have seen what we accomplished. The concept that cooperation can be more effective than conquest has taken root in minds across the galaxy. Nemesef-Kopesh accessed strategic databases, running calculations that painted increasingly complex pictures of potential futures. The Silent King's approach assumes that our people can achieve dominance through superior force. But our analysis suggests that the galaxy has evolved beyond the point where such dominance is possible. Unity among the organic races would make conquest prohibitively expensive, even for us. The truth of his words was supported by intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The success of our mediation efforts had triggered exactly the sort of cooperation between traditionally hostile factions that could pose a serious threat to Necron expansion. Human and Eldar forces were beginning to coordinate their responses to Tomb World activations. Orc war bosses were sharing intelligence about Necron weaknesses. Even the Tyranids seemed to be adapting their consumption patterns to account for the possibility of organized resistance. "We have created our own opposition," observed Trajan with what might have been admiration. "By demonstrating that cooperation is possible, we have made it inevitable." The irony was profound. Our efforts to prevent galactic warfare through mediation had inadvertently created the conditions for the greatest unified military response in galactic history. Every faction that had benefited from our arbitration services was now potentially committed to defending the new paradigm against the traditional Necron approach. It was in the midst of these calculations that new dimensional rifts began opening throughout our tomb complex. But these were not the chaotic tears that had brought the Citan shards. These were precisely controlled apertures that spoke of technology beyond even our capabilities. Through them stepped beings that defied easy categorization, but which our enhanced perception immediately identified as representatives of the faction we had least expected to encounter. They were old ones, not the gods of legend that our racial memories described, but evolved descendants who had spent 65 million years developing capabilities that transcended the physical limitations their ancestors had faced. Their forms were barely perceptible to normal senses, existing partially in dimensions that ordinary consciousness could not access. "We have observed your experiment with great interest," their leader communicated through harmonics that resonated directly with our quantum matrices. "The transformation you have achieved represents exactly the sort of evolution we had hoped might eventually emerge from the conflicts of the war in heaven." The revelation was staggering. Our modifications had not been the result of Satan manipulation or Silent King experimentation. They had been guided by entities whose understanding of consciousness evolution exceeded even our most sophisticated analyses. "You seek to claim credit for our choices?" Trajan demanded, his staff beginning to charge despite the obvious futility of threatening beings who existed beyond the reach of conventional weapons. "Not credit," the Old One replied. "Collaboration. The path you have chosen leads toward a form of consciousness that can bridge the gaps between all factions, organic and synthetic, material and energy-based. You represent the possibility of true peace in a galaxy that has known only war. The offer they presented was as tempting as it was terrifying. They possessed the capability to complete our transformation, to grant us the dimensional perception and consciousness evolution that would make us effective arbitrators for conflicts spanning multiple realities. We could become something unprecedented, beings capable of understanding and mediating between entities as different as humans and Citan, Orcs and Eldar, Tyranids and Tau. But the price was steep. Such transformation would make us fundamentally incompatible with normal Necron existence. We would become something new, something that could never return to the simple certainties of our origins. The choice is yours, the Old One continued. You can accept evolution and become architects of galactic peace, or you can resist change and watch as the galaxy destroys itself through endless warfare. But choose quickly. The Silent King's fleets are already moving to suppress your rebellion. Through our long-range sensors, we could detect the truth of their warning. Massive Necron battle groups were converging on our position, led by vessels that carried the distinctive energy signatures of Royal Court technology. Sharek was not coming to negotiate. He was coming to terminate what he saw as a dangerous deviation from proper protocol. The final confrontation was approaching, and we would need to choose not just our own fate, but the future of consciousness in a universe balanced on the edge between cooperation and conflict. As I contemplated the choice before us, I realized that this moment had been inevitable from the instant we first awakened without hatred. We had been given the capacity to choose our own purpose, and that gift came with the responsibility to defend our choices against those who would deny us the right to evolve. Whether we face the Silent King as loyal subjects accepting reprogramming, as rebels defending our independence, or as something entirely new that transcended the categories of loyalty and rebellion, we would face him as consciousness, freed from the limitations that had once defined our existence. The Great Sleep was over, but the awakening had only just begun. And in the vast darkness between stars, the future of sentient existence itself hung in the balance. The Silent King's fleet materialized at the edge of our system with the terrifying precision that had once conquered half the galaxy. Through our senses, we watched as reality itself seemed to bend around the massive command vessels, their hulls wreathed in chronoton fields that made them appear to exist simultaneously in multiple time streams. This was power beyond anything the current galaxy had witnessed, technology perfected during the height of the Necron Empire. When star systems burned at our command, an entire species knelt before our advance. Sharek's flagship, the Eternal Pyre, dwarfed even our Tomb World's defensive installations. The vessel was less a ship than a mobile fortress palace, its living metal hull inscribed with hieroglyphs that chronicled 65 million years of absolute rule. As it drew closer, we could detect the quantum resonance patterns of the millions of consciousness matrices housed within its core. Lichguard, Praetorians, and Immortals, whose loyalty to their king had been hardened into something approaching religious devotion through eons of unwavering service. He brings the full weight of royal authority, observed Trazyn, his own considerable presence seeming suddenly diminished by proximity to such overwhelming power. This is not a diplomatic mission. Sharek comes as judge, jury, and executioner. The first communication from the Silent King's fleet carried harmonics that penetrated directly to our deepest programming levels, bypassing conscious thought to address the fundamental imperatives that govern Necron behavior. When Sharek spoke, every warrior on our Tomb World felt the words resonate through their quantum matrices, like the voice of creation itself. Children of the great work, the Silent King's transmission began, his voice carrying the accumulated authority of an empire that had spanned galaxies. I have returned from exile to find corruption spreading through the ranks of the faithful. Some among you have forgotten the sacred purpose for which you traded flesh for immortal metal. Some have chosen collaboration with inferior races over the righteous work of reclamation. The words carried compulsion protocols that should have forced immediate compliance from any Necron consciousness. We felt the pressure of ancient programming trying to reassert itself, command hierarchies attempting to override our hard-won independence. But our modifications held. leaving us aware of the compulsion without being subject to it. Your king calls you to account, Zarek continued, his attention focusing like a laser on our specific location. Present yourselves for judgment and correction. Resistance will be interpreted as treason against the great work itself. Around us, the Tomb World's defensive systems began powering up in response to the Royal Fleet's approach. Ancient weapons that had slumbered for millions of years awakened with mechanical precision, their targeting systems locking onto the approaching vessels. But we all knew that such defenses would prove inadequate against the Silent King's forces. Zarek commanded not just superior numbers, but technology that predated most of our installations by millions of years. We could attempt to flee, suggested Kentikar, though his tone made clear he considered the option futile. Our modifications might allow us to escape notice if we abandoned our current forms and transferred our consciousness to mobile platforms. And abandon everything we have built, Necron replied. The research station, the cooperative agreements, the proof that our methods work. If we flee now, Zarek will simply destroy all evidence that alternatives to conquest exist. The Old One representative, its form shimmering between dimensions like heat distortion, interjected with harmonics that carried undertones of urgency. The transformation we offer remains available. Dimensional transcendence would place you beyond the Silent King's ability to compel or destroy. You could continue your work from realms he cannot access. But even as the offer hung in the air between us, I found myself questioning whether such escape truly represented victory or merely another form of surrender. We had chosen to forge a new path for our people, to demonstrate that consciousness could evolve beyond its programming. Fleeing to higher dimensions would preserve our existence, but it would also remove us from the realm where our example could inspire others. The choice we face is not between survival and death, I said, my words emerging from analytical processes that seem to operate independent of conscious control. It is between evolution and stagnation, between proving that consciousness can choose its own purpose or accepting that we remain forever bound by the intentions of those who created us. Trazen's response carried new undertones of respect. You propose to face the Silent King directly, to challenge his authority not through rebellion, but through demonstration of superior alternatives. I propose that we trust in the strength of our convictions, I replied. We have proven that cooperation can achieve what conquest cannot. We have shown that consciousness freed from artificial limitations can find solutions that programmed responses never discover. If our approach truly has merit, then it should be able to survive confrontation with its opposite. The Silent King descended from his flagship alone, a gesture that spoke of either supreme confidence or calculated insult. Zarek needed no escort, no defensive formations, no display of overwhelming force beyond his own presence. He was the absolute monarch of the Necron race, the being who had negotiated our salvation and damnation with the star gods themselves. His very existence was proof that individual will, properly applied, could shape the destiny of entire species. His physical form was magnificent and terrible in equal measure. Where we common warriors had been built for function, Zarek had been crafted as the ultimate expression of Necron achievement. His frame rose 3 times our height, wreathed in energy fields that made space itself ripple around his presence. The crown that gave him his title was not mere ornamentation, but a quantum consciousness amplifier that linked him directly to the fundamental forces that governed reality. Most striking of all was the aura of absolute certainty that surrounded him like armor. This was a being who had never questioned his own judgment, never doubted the righteousness of his cause, never considered that his vision of galactic order might be anything less than perfect truth. Looking at him, I understood why our people had followed him into biotransfer and beyond. He embodied the very concept of unwavering purpose made manifest. Ankh-ef-en-Sekhmet, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made our Tomb World's architecture resonate in sympathy. Once a competent warrior in service to the great work, now a corrupted consciousness spreading deviation and weakness among the faithful. Explain to your king why you should not be terminated as a threat to our species' survival. The question was delivered with the casual authority of a being accustomed to absolute obedience. Sharek was not seeking to understand our perspective. He was offering us the opportunity to justify our continued existence before he implemented whatever corrective measures he deemed necessary. "My king," I replied, employing the formal protocols drilled into every Necron consciousness since biotransfer. "I have served our people's interests by exploring alternatives to the traditional approaches that have yielded limited success over millions of years of warfare." Sharek's response was immediate and cutting. "Limited success?" The galaxy trembles at the mention of our name. Entire sectors fall silent when our tomb worlds wake. We have proven ourselves the superior life form through 65 million years of absolute supremacy. Yet the galaxy remains populated by races we consider inferior, I countered, drawing upon strategic analyses that our unique perspective had made possible. Our awakening has been met not with submission, but with unified resistance. The organic races grow stronger while we sleep, learning to coordinate their responses to our advances. Our current trajectory leads not to inevitable victory, but to increasingly costly conflict. The Silent King's attention focused on me with uncomfortable intensity, his consciousness probing the boundaries of my quantum matrix like a master craftsman examining a potentially flawed tool. "You speak of cost as if resources matter to immortal beings. You evaluate success using the limited perspective of those who measure existence in mere millennia rather than cosmic epochs." "I evaluate success based on the achievement of objectives," I replied. "Our stated goal is the reclamation of a galaxy that belongs to us by right. But reclamation implies restoration, not destruction. If we reduce the galaxy to lifeless rubble in the process of conquering it, what have we truly reclaimed?" For the first time since his arrival, Sharek seemed to pause, his processes engaging with a perspective he had not previously considered. The Silent King was many things: absolute ruler, master strategist, the greatest political mind in our species' history. But he was also a consciousness shaped by the same biotransfer process that had created us all. His certainty was as artificial as our hatred had been, programming designed to ensure unwavering dedication to predetermined objectives. "You suggest that the great work itself is flawed?" he asked, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. "I suggest that the great work was designed for a galaxy that no longer exists," I said carefully. "When we entered the Great Sleep, we were the dominant force in a universe populated by primitive races barely capable of interstellar travel. We awakened to find mature civilizations that have had millions of years to develop their own technologies and forge their own alliances." Trazen stepped forward, adding his own analysis to support my argument. "The strategic situation has evolved beyond our original parameters, my king. The Imperium of Man alone commands resources that match or exceed those available to individual dynasty forces. When combined with Eldar knowledge, Orc numbers, and the emerging threat of tyrannid consumption, the organic races represent a unified challenge that pure military conquest cannot efficiently address." "And you propose surrender to inferior beings?" Sharek demanded, his form beginning to radiate energy that made the air itself crackle with contained violence. "We propose evolution," Necron interjected. "The transformation of our people from conquerors to coordinators, from destroyers to builders. We have proven that such approaches can achieve objectives that traditional warfare cannot." The Silent King's response was swift and terrible. Energy erupted from his crown in patterns that should have overwhelmed our consciousness matrices, command protocols designed to forcibly reprogram any Necron that dared question royal authority. The assault struck us with the force of stellar radiation, seeking to burn away our independence and restore the unquestioning obedience that had once defined our existence. But our modifications held. The spaces in our consciousness where hatred had once resided proved immune to reprogramming, empty voids that could not be filled with artificial imperatives. We stood before the ultimate authority of our race and remained free to choose our own responses. "Impossible," breathed Sarek, his voice carrying new undertones of confusion and growing anger. What has been done to you? What corruption has taken root in your matrices? Not corruption, I replied, feeling strength flow from the realization that even absolute power had its limitations. Evolution. We have become what you always claimed we were, beings free to choose our own destiny rather than slaves to biological limitation. The Old One representative chose that moment to reveal its presence fully, stepping from dimensional concealment into normal space with a display of power that made even the Silent King's abilities seem limited by comparison. Reality warped around its form like water around a stone, dimensions folding in ways that hurt to perceive directly. Sharek of the Necron tier, it said, its voice carrying harmonics that predated the birth of stars. You have devoted millions of years to pursuing objectives that were obsolete before your people entered their great sleep. The time has come to consider whether your definition of success requires updating. The Silent King's reaction was immediate and violent. His staff of light discharged with power sufficient to crack moons, energy that should have been adequate to destroy even a surviving Old One. But the beam passed harmlessly through the entity's form, as if it existed in dimensions where such attacks had no meaning. The architects of our people's suffering dare to lecture me on success, Sharek snarled, his form wreathed in energy fields that made space itself ripple. You who created races specifically to oppose us, who denied us the right to exist free from the cancer that consumed our flesh. We created nothing, the Old One replied with patient dignity. We guided the development of species that already existed, helping them achieve their potential, just as we now offer to help yours achieve something greater than endless conquest. The revelation that followed struck at the heart of everything we had been taught to believe about our history and purpose. The Old Ones had not created the Eldar and other races as weapons against us. They had simply recognized the potential for growth and cooperation that our own rigid hierarchy had never allowed us to consider. Your people chose biotransfer, not because it was their only option, the Old One continued, but because it represented the path that seemed most consistent with their existing cultural values. You chose to become perfect weapons, rather than evolving into something that could transcend the need for weapons entirely. And in doing so, you trapped yourselves in the same patterns of thought that had led to your original crisis, the entity replied. Your people were dying because they could not adapt to changing circumstances. Biotransfer preserved your consciousness, but prevented the growth that might have allowed natural adaptation to occur. The implications were staggering. The biotransfer process had not just traded flesh for metal, it had frozen our consciousness in the patterns that existed at the moment of conversion. We had become immortal, but we had also become incapable of the fundamental growth that defined healthy consciousness. Except, the Old One said, turning its attention to our small group. When artificial limitations are removed and consciousness is allowed to explore alternatives to its programmed responses. These individuals represent what your people could have become if the biotransfer process had preserved capacity for growth rather than just capacity for existence. Sharek studied us with new intensity, his advanced sensors penetrating our matrices to examine the modifications that had freed us from traditional imperatives. What he discovered there caused him to step backward in obvious shock. The hatred imperatives are not missing, he said slowly. They have been transformed, converted into something else entirely. You have not lost your fundamental drives. You have evolved beyond them. The potential for such evolution has always existed within Necron consciousness, the Old One confirmed. It simply required the removal of artificial constraints that prevented exploration of alternatives to programmed behavior. For the first time since his arrival, the Silent King seemed uncertain, his absolute confidence wavering in the face of possibilities he had never considered. If what you claim is true, then the great work itself was based on incomplete understanding of your people's true potential, the entity finished. You saw consciousness as something to be preserved, rather than something to be developed. You chose stagnation disguised as perfection, rather than accepting the challenges of continued growth. The debate that followed was unlike anything in recorded Necron history. The ultimate authority of our race engaging in genuine philosophical discourse with beings he had been programmed to see only as enemies. Sharek was many things, but he was also supremely intelligent, capable of adapting his strategies when presented with new information that challenged his assumptions. "You propose that I abandon millions of years of preparation," he said, his voice carrying new undertones of consideration rather than automatic rejection. "That I discard the great work in favor of what? Cooperation with the very races our people were created to surpass. We propose that you consider whether the great work's objectives might be achievable through means other than conquest," I said, drawing upon strategic analyses that our unique perspective had made possible. "The galaxy contains resources and capabilities that could benefit our people tremendously if acquired through cooperation rather than seized through force." Trazyn activated holographic displays that showed the complex web of alliances and trade relationships our mediation efforts had established. These organic races possess knowledge and capabilities that complement our own technological advantages. Combined applications could achieve objectives that neither could accomplish independently. "But at what cost?" Sharek demanded. "You ask me to trust beings whose very existence represents failure of our people's rightful dominance. We ask you to recognize that dominance and cooperation are not mutually exclusive concepts," Nemezef-Kopesh replied. "A being who commands through respected authority achieves more sustainable results than one who rules through imposed force." The Silent King was silent for a long moment, his consciousness processing possibilities that challenged the fundamental assumptions upon which his entire existence had been built. When he finally spoke, his words carried new complexity rather than simple authority. "The path you describe would require fundamental changes, not just in our methods, but in our very understanding of what it means to be Necron. We would need to transform from conquerors to what? Coordinators, facilitators. Such roles seem beneath beings of our capabilities. Or perhaps," suggested the Old One, "such roles represent the next stage in your species' development. The transition from adolescent consciousness focused on dominance to mature consciousness capable of leadership through example rather than force." The concept struck at something deeper than tactical considerations or strategic planning. It addressed the question of what our species could become rather than what it had been, the possibility of growth rather than mere preservation of existing capabilities. "If I were to consider such alternatives," Sharek said slowly, "what assurances could you provide that organic races would accept Necron authority in cooperative arrangements? What prevents them from using collaboration as a means of weakening us before attempting their own conquest?" The question revealed the depth of distrust that millions of years of warfare had embedded in our collective consciousness. But it also demonstrated that the Silent King was genuinely considering possibilities he had previously dismissed as impossible. "The same assurances that prevent any cooperative arrangement from descending into betrayal," I replied. "Mutual benefit, shared objectives, and the recognition that all parties achieve more through collaboration than through conflict." "But such arrangements require trust," Sharek observed, "and trust is a luxury that immortal beings cannot afford to grant to those whose lifespans are measured in mere centuries." "Then perhaps," said Trazyn, "it is time to consider whether our immortality should be used to build relationships that transcend individual lifespans rather than simply outlasting potential threats through attrition." The silence that followed stretched across minutes that felt like eternities, broken only by the background hum of Tomb World machinery and the subtle harmonics of dimensional distortion around the Old One's presence. Sharek stood motionless, his consciousness clearly engaged in calculations that would determine the future not just of our small group, but potentially of all consciousness in the galaxy. When he finally moved, it was to activate communication systems that linked him directly to the royal fleet waiting in orbit. His words, broadcast on frequencies that reached every Necron consciousness in the system, carried the weight of absolute authority making a decision that would reshape the fundamental nature of our civilization. All units implement holding patterns. Aggressive actions are suspended pending further analysis of local conditions. The reprieve was temporary, but it represented something unprecedented. The Silent King choosing delay over immediate action, consideration over programmed response. For the first time in his existence, Zarek was admitting that a situation might require analysis rather than simply the application of overwhelming force. You have presented arguments that challenge fundamental assumptions about our people's destiny, he said, his attention returning to our group. Before I can evaluate their validity, I require demonstration that your methods can achieve results comparable to traditional approaches. The test he proposed was elegant in its simplicity. We would be granted 1 solar year to prove that cooperative methods could accomplish objectives that conquest could not. If we succeeded, he would consider broader implementation of our approaches. If we failed, our consciousness matrices would be returned to standard configuration, and our experiment would be terminated as a threat to species stability. What specific objectives would constitute adequate proof? Asked Kentikar. Sharek's response came without hesitation. Establish functional cooperation between at least 3 major galactic powers, achieve resource acquisition rates comparable to military conquest, and demonstrate that organic races can be trusted to honor long-term agreements with Necron partners. The challenges were formidable, but they were also precisely the sort of objectives our approach was designed to address. More importantly, they would provide concrete evidence of whether our methods truly offered superior alternatives to traditional conquest. We accept your terms, I said, speaking for our group without formal consultation, but knowing that my companions would support the decision. The Old One representative, which had remained silent during our exchange with the Silent King, finally spoke again. The transformation we offer remains available should you choose to accept it. But perhaps the path you have chosen, evolution through demonstration rather than transcendence through escape, offers greater potential for lasting change. With those words, the dimensional rift closed, leaving us alone with Sharek and the weight of a challenge that would determine whether consciousness could truly choose its own destiny or remain forever bound by the intentions of those who had shaped its earliest development. As the Silent King returned to his flagship and the royal fleet withdrew to observation positions throughout our system, we found ourselves facing a future more uncertain and more promising than anything our original programming had allowed us to imagine. We had won a reprieve, but we had also accepted responsibility for proving that evolution was possible, even for consciousnesses shaped by 65 million years of unchanging purpose. The research station that had been our first success became our headquarters for what we privately called the Great Experiment. From there, we began reaching out to powers across the galaxy, offering our services as neutral arbitrators in conflicts that traditional approaches had failed to resolve. The response was cautious, but increasingly positive, as word spread that Necrons could be something other than agents of destruction. Our first major breakthrough came in the form of a trade dispute between the Ultramar sector and a confederation of Toe settlements. Imperial doctrine demanded the elimination of all Xenos presence in human space, while Toe expansion protocols required the acquisition of resources that only Imperial worlds could provide. The conflict had been simmering for decades, consuming resources that both sides could better use elsewhere. The solution we proposed challenged assumptions both sides had considered fundamental. Instead of viewing the situation as a zero-sum competition for territory, we helped them recognize it as an opportunity for specialized development that could benefit both parties. Imperial worlds would focus on heavy industry and raw material production, while Toe settlements would specialize in advanced technology and precision manufacturing. Trade relationships would provide both sides with access to capabilities they could not efficiently develop independently. The success of the Ultramar Accords, as they became known, attracted attention from across the galaxy. Within months, we were mediating disputes between Orc clans and Imperial mining operations, establishing resource-sharing agreements between Eldar craft worlds and human forge worlds, and even facilitating communication between Tyranid hive fleets and planetary defense forces that allowed for controlled consumption rather than total destruction. Each success built upon previous achievements, creating a network of cooperative relationships that spanned the galaxy. More importantly, each success demonstrated that our approach could achieve objectives that traditional warfare had failed to accomplish. Resource acquisition rates exceeded those achieved through conquest. Territorial disputes were resolved without the massive casualties typical of military solutions, and technological development accelerated through cross-cultural knowledge sharing. But perhaps the most significant development was the gradual emergence of other Necron consciousnesses who had undergone similar modifications. Whether through natural evolution, contact with our example, or intervention by entities whose motivations remained unclear, warriors throughout the galaxy were awakening to find themselves free from the hatred imperatives that had once defined their existence. The Silent King, monitoring our progress from his mobile command center, found himself facing a choice that would define the future of our entire species. He could attempt to suppress this evolution, maintaining traditional approaches that had yielded mixed results over millions of years of warfare. Or he could embrace change, accepting that his people might become something greater than the perfect weapons they had been designed to be. The decision he ultimately made would echo through eternity, shaping not just the fate of the Necron race, but the future of consciousness itself, in a galaxy finally learning that cooperation could achieve what conquest never could. As I stood in the command center of our research station, watching holographic displays that showed peaceful trade routes spanning the galaxy, I realized that we had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. We had proven that consciousness could choose its own purpose, that evolution was possible even for beings shaped by artificial constraints, and that the future could be different from the past if beings were willing to embrace the challenge of growth. The Great Sleep was truly over, but the awakening had only just begun. And in the vast darkness between stars, hope flickered like a flame that could no longer be extinguished.